You get the approval email at 10 a.m. and suddenly you feel rich. The bank says you can borrow $500,000. Your agent is already texting you listings. Everyone says now is the time to stop throwing money away on rent. But by 3 p.m. that same day, when you start doing the actual math on a napkin, something feels wrong, really wrong. The approval and the ability to afford are not the same thing. One is a banking decision. The other is whether you can eat well, sleep at night, and handle emergencies. Nobody explains this gap clearly, which means millions of people step into houses that destroy them financially without ever knowing it was coming. Let me show you exactly how this works. And more importantly, how to think clearly about whether a $500,000 home is actually a home or just an anchor. It starts with a simple rule that almost nobody follows. When banks evaluate whether you can afford a mortgage, they use something called the debt-to-income ratio, specifically the 28% rule. That means your housing payment should never exceed 28% of your gross monthly income. This is the conservative measurement. Most lenders will go up to 43%, but that's when you're already stretching. Let's do the math on that $500,000 house. After you put 20% down, you're financing $400,000. With interest rates where they typically sit, your mortgage payment alone lands around $2,400 per month. But that number is almost meaningless because it's not your actual housing cost. Here's where it gets real. On top of the mortgage, you're paying property taxes, depending on your state. That could be another $300 to $600 monthly. Then comes homeowner's insurance, which runs $150 to $300. Property maintenance isn't optional. You need to budget roughly 1% of the home's value annually, which breaks down to about $400 monthly for a $500K house. Then there's the HOA, if your property has one, landscaping, utilities that are higher than renting, and probably PMI if you didn't have that full 20% down. Add it all together and your actual housing cost is closer to $4,000 to $4,400 monthly. Not $2,400. Not even close. Now reverse engineer the 28% rule. If your housing payment is $4,200, and that should be 28% of your gross income, you need to be making roughly $180,000 per year. That's household income, before taxes, before any other debts. Here's the problem. Only about 1 in 10 American households make $180,000 or more annually. The median household income in the US is around $75,000. The people buying these $500,000 homes are either significantly above average earners, or they're stretching past the 43% rule, which means they're already in the danger zone. This is where the system gets interesting. Banks will absolutely approve you for that stretch. The 43% rule exists specifically because enough people push past 28% that lenders have a secondary threshold. But here's what the lender doesn't care about: whether you can actually live. They care about whether you'll default. There's a meaningful difference. When you're spending 43% or 46% of your take-home pay on housing, the math leaves almost nothing for emergencies. A car repair becomes a crisis. A medical bill becomes a choice between paying it and eating. Many people in this situation cut back on retirement contributions, skip medical care, or stop building emergency savings entirely. The stress becomes constant. Think about a dual-income household making $160,000 combined. That's actually solid income. Both people have decent jobs. They should feel stable. But when they buy that $500,000 house, they're putting roughly $300 toward housing monthly after taxes. Land on that gross income. Their take-home is probably around $9,500 monthly after federal, state, and FICA taxes. So they're spending 45% of what they actually get to keep on housing. Add food, utilities, insurance, childcare, and suddenly there's barely any oxygen left. Most people in this situation make the same choice. They normalize the stress. They stop going out. They don't take vacations. They skip the dental cleaning because it's not urgent. They become house rich and life poor. And they think it's normal because everyone around them in that nice neighborhood is doing the exact same thing. The real problem is what happened to home prices over the last 30 years. Since 1990, home prices have roughly quadrupled in most major metros. Median household income in that same period increased by about 180%. The math doesn't balance. The market has separated from actual earning power. A $500 000 house in Denver or Austin or any suburb near a major city is no longer a luxury. It's what normal homes cost now. That's the trap. What makes this harder is the psychological layer. There's real social pressure baked into home ownership in America. You hear it from family. You're throwing away rent. You hear it from coworkers buying homes. You internalize it as a marker of adulthood and success. Renting starts to feel like failure, even though renting might be the financially healthier choice for you personally. But here's what I want you to notice. The 28% rule exists because actuaries and risk experts figured out that beyond that threshold, people's lives start breaking. They can pay the mortgage, sure they can pass the lender's approval, but they can actually live, they can save, they can handle disruption. They're trapped. If you spend 28% of your gross income on housing, your life still works. You have room for unexpected costs. You can still build savings. You have mental space that isn't consumed by housing anxiety. That number isn't arbitrary. It's the difference between owning a home and being owned by one. So what if you want to buy, but you're not in that 1 in 10 income bracket? The options are real, and they're not failures. You can buy a smaller or older home that costs $300,000 instead of $500,000. The total monthly payment drops by roughly $800, and suddenly you're back in the sustainable zone. You can move to a more affordable region where $500, 000, buys something exceptional instead of ordinary. You can rent for another 5 years while saving aggressively for a larger down payment, which reduces how much you need to finance and lowers your monthly burden. You can wait for market adjustments, which do happen. Even though real estate feels permanent, these aren't consolation prizes. These are actual wealth-building paths. The person who buys a $300,000 home sustainably will build more equity over 10 years than the person who stretches for $500,000 and can't save anything. The person who rents for 5 more years while saving $500 monthly will have $90,000 to put down when they do buy. And their mortgage payments will reflect that. Their life won't be consumed by anxiety. Here's another angle nobody talks about. Even when you can technically afford that $500,000 house, you should ask yourself, what am I not doing because of this purchase? Are you skipping retirement contributions? Are you carrying credit card debt? Are you unable to help your kids with college? Are you one medical emergency away from real trouble? The wealthiest people I've seen aren't the ones with the biggest house and the maximum debt. They're the ones with margin. The person making $160,000 and spending $3,200 on housing has more genuine wealth than the person making $180,000 and spending $400 on housing. The first person can handle life. The second person is living on a wire. Real wealth is freedom. It's the ability to handle surprises. It's knowing you can take a week off work if you're burned out. It's being able to help a family member in crisis. It's having room to think clearly instead of constantly calculating whether there's enough money. A $500,000 house that costs you 46% of your income is not a wealth-building asset. It's a liability disguised as an asset. This is probably where you're waiting for the part where I tell you how to trick the system. How to get approved for more than you should. How to make $500,000 houses affordable on $100,000 income. That's not coming. There's no trick. The rule is real. The math is real. And more importantly, the people who tried to beat it aren't happy. What actually shifts things is understanding what you're really buying. A house isn't an investment vehicle the way people talk about it. It's a place to live. Yes, property appreciates over time, but you can't actually access that equity unless you sell the house. And then you need another place to live. The equity is trapped. The monthly payment is real. The stress is real. The limited capacity to handle emergencies is real. Here's the clean way to think about it. A house is affordable when the monthly payment plus all costs stays below 28% of your gross income, or at absolute maximum 35% if you have solid income and no other debts. If hitting those numbers requires you to earn $180, 000 plus when you're currently at $110,000, then that price point isn't your market yet. That's not failure. That's clarity. And clarity is where actual decisions happen. You can decide I'll buy something smaller now and upgrade in 7 years. You can decide I'll rent for 3 more years and save aggressively. You can decide I'll move to where my income goes further. These are all wealth-building decisions. The worst decision is the one most people make by default. Get approved for the maximum amount. Buy the house everyone else is buying. Assume the stress is normal, and spend the next 15 years feeling like you're barely holding on financially. That's not how it has to work. What changes this for you personally depends on your specific situation. Your income, your debt, your market, your family size. But the framework is the same. Calculate what 28% of your actual take-home is monthly. That's your housing budget ceiling. Anything above it is betting that you'll figure out the extra somehow, which usually means cutting everywhere else or going into debt. The people who feel genuinely stable around money aren't the ones with the most stuff. They're the ones with the most breathing room. And breathing room comes from spending less on your housing than the maximum you can technically borrow. 3 things to remember. First, bank approval is not the same as financial sustainability. The system will lend you far more than you should borrow. Second, the 28% rule exists because it actually works. It's not a suggestion, it's the threshold where your life still functions. Third, choosing not to stretch for the maximum house you can qualify for isn't giving up. It's the beginning of actual wealth building. The most important realization you can have is this: owning a home should reduce your financial anxiety, not create it. If the housing payment is consuming your ability to handle life, then it's too much house for your current situation. That's not a personal failure. That's the system working exactly how it was designed.